So I'll go ahead. I like to get a warm up. I can do it in our favorite way. So gentlemen, our guest today is actually a topic we're talking about. This is the assessment. Scott and I both love Smartless, the show, and that's what I was referencing there. Welcome to One EMS, the assessment, and I'm happy to have Scott on. We are going to chat whatever we're going to chat about today, but the guiding thing that's been on my mind, Scott, has been the paramedic industry feels like it is dying. Like to me, and I've been in this field for 30 years. I've been a paramedic, 15 to 20 of that. And it really feels like there's nothing positive about it anymore. It's very difficult to go to school. It's very expensive to go to school. And then what? What do we always hear in the field? Because I'm obviously not in the field anymore. I don't imagine you're on a truck very often anymore either. But what we hear is the pay won't go up for the education, but the stress level surely goes up. So just off the straw man premise of, is the paramedic industry dying? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what often folks who've been in it for 30 years say, because I can remember when I started in the 90s, the folks working the truck then really thought the sky was falling because we had to wear rubber gloves. Um, so I think though what it's doing is going through an evolution, shedding sort of an old skin so that it can enjoy the new one. And I do think that because on some level we're watching paramedics work in areas and in capacities that we've never seen before. We are, through the pandemic, we saw folks doing things that, frankly, if you had asked me, I would have never believed would be out doing vaccinations, even though it's quite, like easily in their skill set. But
Right.
Go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with
Oh
you.
yeah, I mean, I just think, I think that the value prop for the job has changed, right? So when I got into being an EMT back in the 90s, I wanted to do a career that mattered, and frankly, I didn't know what the pay was. I did take $1 an hour pay cut from a grocery store back in 90 to get on the ambulance. But truthfully, as a kid who had dropped out of college, I wanted to do something that maybe my peers would think was respectable, and maybe maybe sort of, I don't know, that I felt was noble, and I think we've seen there's sort of these non sequitur two things going on at the same time, and there's a group that feels like they're not being, that they're not as valued and respected as we look across the healthcare spectrum. But at the same token, I see more and more paramedics work in EDs and in other non-traditional settings that tell me, maybe it's not exactly that. So dying, I think, is I think I'm hoping it's like the phoenix, right? As it burns, it just comes on to something new. But I think as long as there are people who need EMTs and paramedics out on the road, there'll be EMTs and paramedics out on the road.
I mean, the question, I'm at a point in the industry that I'm like, let's throw away everything we ever thought and let's really look at what's working and what's not working. I don't know. There's a need for paramedics when we can merge it. And I know I'm enraging millions of paramedics, and I get it, but let's put the ego aside for a second. What do we complain about? Nursing school is usually more affordable and a little bit easier. Well, I don't know about easier, but easier to obtain. It's everywhere. There's nursing schools everywhere where, at least in Georgia, paramedic has become a harder thing to obtain as a class. They don't get put on very often. They're almost 2 years, which I know nursing school is the same. But when nurses come out, because of years of dedication of the industry and possibly even some of the union stuff, that there's a higher and better career to walk into, and somewhat, I'm going to argue, somewhat of a less stressful career to start off with than paramedic. You can get essentially the same training in my, well, good. I see you have an opinion. You essentially have some same training, but you walk out paramedic, you're getting $20, $25 an hour. As a nurse, rookie in the ER with tons of protection and training, you're getting $30, $35 an hour. But what was your thought?
Yeah, so a couple things. One, I have a niece I'm incredibly proud of, graduated nursing school and went to go work in the hospital that I used to bring patients to all the time. And she's only a couple years in, and she's already looking to make a career, not a career change, but a an environmental change, because the, sort of the mood in the hospital is exactly the same as the mood is on the street for EMS folks,
Really?
right? In other words, she said that, like, I came in so enthusiastic and so thrilled to work in this nursing field, and my colleagues have basically beaten that right out of me. And
Oh,
so, yeah, like, she's like, they're so unhappy, and so, and I was at the pharmacy last night picking up some medicines, and the folks at the pharmacy, frankly, are getting, it's not their fault that the docs didn't call in the medicines, or the NPs, or whoever. But
right, right.
I think, I don't know, I think, as I look at the paramedic school issue, one of the things that I really think that we need to look at is, I believe that most of our allied health professionals, and then those who go to medical school, NP, nursing school, I think working on an ambulance should be a mandatory part of that experience. In other words, or at least a competitive
Yeah.
advantage, because my wife, who's a primary care doctor, worked on an ambulance for a couple of years. And she said, Scott, when I got to my second and third year, of medical school, and I started doing clinical rotations, she's like, I was so comfortable interviewing and interacting with patients because I had been doing it for over a year on the ambulance. And she said, whereas my colleagues who came from non-medical careers, they were sweating and didn't quite know what to do. And so, I think as we talk about this idea of an Affordable Care Act, and this idea of, patient-centered care and all of that, one of the challenges are that a lot of the other medical professions don't understand what capabilities are on an ambulance. How many times did you go to a nurse's station to pick up a patient for an interfacility or non-urgent medical transport, and they'd say, like, does your ambulance have oxygen? And you'd be like, and a steering wheel, like. So, I think, but I think that's our fault. Number one, we need to do a better job at educating. But I do think that it would be in a time when it is more competitive than ever to get into a medical school and nursing program, or any of those. I do think that we should be building, or requiring people to go through those other disciplines in medicine, so that they can have a better, more well-rounded.
Exactly. You talked about the patient-centered care, which is not fully what we're doing right now, right? It's us versus them. That's why we're moving towards. But that's the medics. The hospital's a crapshoot. The nurses don't know and we love to talk about in our field. Well, nurses couldn't do what we can do, and I can tell you from experience that is true. But also the vice versa is true. I've worked in the ER, and I went. It was a program we were piloting many years ago, and they were just, I was like, okay, show me what you do. And they were walking me around because at night and we were slow. And they showed me the ER pharmacy. And I'm like, holy crap. Because I had memorized like 30 drugs or whatever we memorized as medics. And like, you know, all these drugs. And this is before cell phones. So you couldn't just Google something real quick. And they're like, yeah, we have to know every one of these drugs, their interaction. So if a doctor is flying too fast and they think too fast and they write down something, we have to wait. We gave this earlier in our records. This interacts with it that way. Like, wow, that's a lot. But then we turn around and I can intubate left and right in the ER, and they can't. So there is a flip side to both, man. And that's where I'm thinking. I like that you said metamorphosis, because that's what we've been working at with One EMS and the other company I work with. That it can't be ambulances versus hospital, right? It can't be nurses versus medics. It has to be an extension of the thing. I love that we changed it from emergency medicine, which used to be the big nomenclature, right? Where the ditch doctors, to pre-hospital. And like, well, that opens up a joint system. We are the pre-hospital, you're the hospital of us all together. And I'm finding more success in we haven't executed it yet, but we started doing it a little bit in my company, of having our medics go and do standby and or go into the ER and just shadow a nurse for a little bit. And we're talking with the hospital about having, some of their nurses come and ride for a little bit on our trucks, so they understand the bigger picture of it all and can work together as a team. Because, dude, what you just said about we are young, I got some statistics we're going to bring out. Oh, man, I got my EMT in 1996. And I remember on the third rides, why would you want to get in this field? Why are you trying to do? There's no money in this field. Oh, I said one day I might be a medic. Like, why would you want to do that? It's all stress and nobody. I just got beat down. And the only way I made it to paramedic was just this is what felt right. I'm going to do it. Well, honestly, it's because I got tired of being told what to do. I don't like being told what to do as an EMT, so I'm a paramedic. But what was your path? How'd you get past that negativity of the beatdown?
Yeah, well, it's funny because I can remember my orientation, back in the early '90s was like basically keep your mouth shut, and if you're still here in 6 months, we'll accept you. And I think today, your average employee today would be like, "I'm sorry, I've got something to say," and truthfully, the way that it was done when I came up, I don't think was the right way. And frankly,
No.
it doesn't even matter because as I sort of jokingly say when people are like these people have changed, I'm like, no, nope, it's that actually we haven't. And so as we think about one of the challenges I think that I've really struggled with is one, understanding what your part is in the bigger piece, right? That I always I worked on an ambulance in the Lynn, Massachusetts, Revere, Massachusetts area where we would do 20 to 30 calls in a 24-hour shift. And there were times where I was pretty burnt out or feeling pretty tired, but it was also understanding what role you played in the bigger picture, right? So for many of the people in those communities, we were the public safety net for them, and we were the access point for healthcare because healthcare just didn't exist, and even worse now because over the course of my active work in the field, I watched hospital after hospital after hospital close, and our transport distances became
Yes.
longer. Yeah, and just the available healthcare to folks became more difficult, right? Because think about it, as my wife told me as a primary care, she says, it can take a year or two for someone to get in with a primary care physician. And her schedule currently books out into early 26. And so when you think about that, right, when you think about that, number one, by the way, it's hard for healthcare, any healthcare provider, because if you can't schedule, you have to try and think 18 months ahead of when you want to take time off. That's a real pain, right?
Right.
But I think one of the other challenges that I saw was this. We had a shift probably 10 to 15 years ago where everybody wanted to put two paramedics on an ambulance, and in reality, tiered systems, in my experience, always have worked. At least I think it's about putting the right tool in the right place at the right time. And we in Massachusetts for a long time had two paramedics on a truck, which often sort of blew my mind because a really good basic and a good medic make a great team. And what I think, or what I feel like I've seen is less of an emphasis on the art form and more algorithmic practicing of medicine. And and I know when I worked on the street, there was pretty much nothing that frightened me. I'm not suggesting that I didn't ever not see it. I just always felt like I could handle the emergency that was in front of me. And I also knew I was lucky because I did work in an area that had 3 or 4 level 1 trauma centers within 15 minutes of where I was. I've been on calls in the Midwest where you're 90 minutes, and that to me is a little bit frightening. But I just think again it comes down to one, we have to do a better job at sort of suggesting what the system should be, right? When the community's like, well, we want two paramedics on the truck, and I want to say to them, well, that's not necessarily a good thing, right? Because in my community in Topsfield, we have paramedics, but when you do 800 transports a year, how competent or proficient are you going to be at anything, right? And I'm not, the men and women on that department are really amazing, but the fact of the matter is, if you were about to go under surgery and the surgeon, he or she was like, well, no, I mean, I've done like 6 of these over the last 4 years, you'd be like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I think it's about us doing a better job at public outreach and education, and then also setting realistic expectations for people who do this job, to say like, look, yeah, you may not, if you're getting into this to get wealthy, that's probably not going to work. But if this is part of a lot, some people see this as a stepping stone job. I think that that's fine. If that's where you're going. For many nurses, it's a stepping stone job. For many med techs, it's a stepping stone job. So, I don't, I don't think I do see a major modification, and it does feel at times like things are really, really difficult. But when we look at the turnover surveys for the last couple of years, turnover's right back where it was prior to the pandemic, right? And wages and benefits are up about 25 to 30%. So,
Well,
when I looked at people 5 years ago and I said, geez, if we could, we need more pay. So if we could increase pay by 30%, would that fix the problem? Yes, it would. I go, all right, well, 5 years later, guess what? Problem still exists.
it's really a pay ratio, right? Because I expressed to my wife the other day, I have worked my entire adult life to really be comfortable, right? And I haven't hit this target yet, but that target that I thought would be comfortable was $100,000 a year. I mean, I cannot comprehend after surviving on 30 and 40 for so long how $100,000 a year that would be comfortable. We do vacations. It is lower middle class at this point in the United States, and still, and I was like, holy cow! When I heard that statistic the other day, I was like, no wonder I'm so frustrated with my life. Is between, I think it's 65 and 120 is middle class. How is $60,000 poor? But that's the economy we live in. So that 30% moved with the economy. So essentially the same pay comparatively.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
Yeah, there's a guy that did some research out of Harvard, a guy by the name of Sean Aker, has a book called The Happiness Advantage. And one of the things that Sean says is that he's like, the problem was saying I'll be happy if I get here, right? Because I can remember thinking, if I ever made 50 grand, man, I'd be living. Or if I ever made 100 grand, I'd be living. But what he said is the challenge with basing your happiness or saying that that's the contingency that has to occur is that, number one, we tend to move the finish line, right? So when you get there, when let's say you're making 100,000 a year, the problem is that you do start to gross up your lifestyle. And I watch this happen with EMTs and paramedics all the time. They'll come in, and they'll go out and buy that F-350 pickup, and they'll buy a Harley Davidson, or they'll go out because they're working 60, 70, 80, 90 hours a week. And then at some point, right, the shine wears off of the object, and you go, gosh, now I've got no choice but to work this hard. And you've grossed your lifestyle up. I mean, I think that's one of the things that when we talk about EMS as a profession that we need to do a better job as is, when you come into work as a physician or a nurse, oftentimes there are sort of, expectations that, or pushes to get people to start saving for retirement. There are, discussions about professional development and, how to, live your life. I think we sort of treat EMS like a nomadic or mercenary type career. And I think if we could get away from that, and I understand that it's a relatively, and I say relatively low paying job, you just can't base your happiness. I've taken jobs because of money, and it's like they say in politics, a job taken for political reasons will be lost for political reasons.
Yeah. Let's talk some statistics along those lines. I Googled it, and because I'd heard some statistics, I just want to see something in writing. The American Ambulance Association, ambulance.org, it says voluntary and overall turnover for paramedics increased for 2022, with the turnover rate being in the 20 to 36% range. Well, it says for EMTs and paramedics, at a 6% increase over the prior year, meaning that EMS agencies are experiencing a full turnover of staff every 3 to 4 years. The one I haven't seen yet that I heard, I can't verify. Well, CBS News has one about 1/3 quit in 2021, which we know is right out of the pandemic. But I thought NREMT had put out that about 16 to 18% a month are leaving the field, medics. But that's we're not putting in 36% back. We'd have to put in 40 to 50% to even overcome that, really, of new medics into the field.
Yeah. So it's funny. I'm actually doing an interview with NBC this afternoon on the turnover survey. And just so you know, the 2024's survey has closed, and we're waiting. The data is being crunched right now, and we'll see what those numbers look like. John Carroll University, Dr. Dover Spike, and Dr. Rosanna Miguel out of Delaware State University are doing, not Delaware State, I'm sorry, John Carroll University. They're doing the data analysis with their teams. And so, yes, the 22, we did see a spike in 22 was the first, 21 was the first year we had done the survey. So 22's report is on 21's data, 23
Yeah.
on 22's data. And so that was the first time we had done the report following the pandemic. And those numbers were spiked. Last year's report, the numbers returned to where they were pre-pandemic.
Which is roughly what?
Which is roughly anywhere between 21 to 30%. They had spiked in 22 up to 36%. And but you're right. Basically, and Ian, when you say like, hey, 30% a year is 30% a month, right? It just carries over every single month.
Oh yeah, I guess so. Yeah.
So when I look at people and I say, and we know that roughly, like your turnover is almost twice in the first year for someone you bring into the field than it is once they make it past that first year, right? Then it's more, they have a better likelihood of success. And so when I look at that, that's part of why I've been advocating, like, look, our orientation programs probably need to be less clinically based, because if your orientation program is supposed to be based, and in the purpose of orientation, right, is not just to say you did it. The purpose of orientation is to adequately prepare people to do the job and be successful in the job. And if that's the case, and probably 20% of our time is spent doing clinical medicine, we need to be modifying orientations to be able to prepare these people to do this job, right? Which means, geez, how do you deal with fatigue? How do you deal with financial stress? Because it's probably, I would say, the number one stressor for most people in employment in this country is financial. But by the way, the thing with finances it's a two-sided equation, right? It's how much money's coming in versus how much money's going out. And some of that is about, talking with people about being smarter about how they spend their money. Nutrition, right? I mean, there's a lot to this job that's beyond clinical medicine. And just so we know, the people who show up at your door to work at your ambulance, they've already been through an EMT program or a paramedic program. They've already been through a state and a national test. They've already been through all, right? And you probably even given them some kind of test before you hired them. So when you get to orientation, let's teach them about how to be successful in the job. And that involves a way, way broader spectrum of things than the clinical medicine.
Time management, financial management, emotional health management.
Learning how to say no, right? Learning how to say no. Hey, Charles, can you come in again? And you know what? I'm sorry, I can't. Because I know I used to feel super guilty every time they'd call me, and I was like, I don't care what happens today. I'm going home. I'm tired, man. I've been up for 72. And they'd say, like, please, dude, please. And some of that is even teaching your supervisors and leaders to understand that, like, look, don't ask someone can't say no. Right? Don't ask them. I hate to say it, but that person, don't drive them into the ground. And so
do that one more time. I've been making notes as we're talking, but another, you brought up your daughter in the nursing field. So I said, well, let's see. We like to think medics have it so hard. We are the salt of the earth, and we're treated like it. And nurses have it so easy. Nope. Nearly 18%. This is according to American Nurses Association at nursingworld.org. Nearly 18% of newly licensed registered nurses quit the profession within the first year. Like with more advanced nurses, common causes for leaving include stressful working conditions, lack of leadership and supervision, and understaffed facilities. Oh, I don't know. That sounds exactly like paramedic medicine. Right.
Yeah, and I think that's what my niece, who works at just got into the career. She said, many of these nurses were on board during the pandemic, and they're just still a little hungover from the pandemic. But a lot of them, right, you come in, and as I look at the healthcare career, and my wife loves what she does, but to be perfectly honest, right, I watch her see 20 to 26 patients a day. And then every night she comes home and works on the computer doing records and letters and labs for an additional 2 to 3 hours every night. And you sort of think to yourself, like, that's just not a sustainable model long term, right? You can't count on other people's capital to run your healthcare system. And we're even watching, like, she's part of one of the largest healthcare systems in Massachusetts, and even their employee health plan is awful. By the way, we're required to use their healthcare providers, but their health plan is
Yeah.
awful, right? And in fact, my daughter was transported after following an allergic reaction, and I'm typical EMS guy. I have no idea, even though I'm pretty involved in the balance billing issue, I'm pretty involved at the reimbursement level, all that stuff. I had no idea what our policy covered, and so their health plan paid less than Massachusetts Medicaid for the advanced life support transport that my daughter got. And I called them up and I said, you cannot be the premier healthcare system in Massachusetts and and provide healthcare at this level. But again, to your point, my niece, what she said when it came to being burnt out was that there was just such a high level of negativity. And by the way, a lot of that negativity starts at the leadership level, because sort of again, what we see are people expecting, organizations expecting employees to basically cover their, and I'm using checks metaphorically, their checks with their own money, right? Like, they're just expecting, oh my gosh, well, you're just going to work. We need you to work, and we're going to increase those patient to nurse ratios. But the same thing with paramedics. When I got into the job in 1990s, we would do, some days we do 30 calls, some days we do none, or two or three. Today, if you have an ambulance that's not running pretty much a point 0.4 or 0.5, you can't afford to maintain that unit. You can't afford to do the
Right.
job. So that's a function of, again, I'm watching insurance companies get richer and richer and richer, but pay less and less and less. And we know, if we look at the functional share prices of a lot of these insurance companies, and again, it's not, I mean, I understand their job is to process claims, their job is to pay claims, but their job is to reduce the amount that they're paying for every claim they can. But at the end of the day, you can have an EMS system, good, fast, or cheap. You only get two, though.
I think one of the biggest fallacies in medicine, I don't know how to overcome it, but from the ground up, from ambulances through hospital, or you can say from the top down, from hospitals, whatever, highest level of medicine you want to think about. The fallacy is we have to make it happen. And that you literally can't. If it's why it's called a mass casualty incident. It overwhelms the resources of the system. You can't just 9/11. You couldn't just make it happen, right? They filled up. I mean, they were piping in ambulances from all over the United States, but they were sending out patients everywhere they could, because you can't. But we live on that. We just have to make it happen. At the end of the day, because I dealt with a hospital that was like, there at the time, the person running the hospital, their whole stance was, and she would get teary-eyed, literally talking about, like, oh my God, y'all, I can't think of the idea that a patient would come here and they would die, and oh, the patients. And I went, first rule of, it's almost like Fight Club. The first rule of medicine is people die. The second rule of medicine is people die. It's like, you can't save them all. So to build a business model on the fact that we have to make it happen, that's why we're burning out people and getting lawsuits.
Yeah, I mean, I do think tort reform is a huge piece, right? There's this expectation that people think that everyone can be saved, and I think there's a statistic that we spend the most amount of money in the last 2 years of someone's life than we spend in any other time in their life combined. But I think that we come back to that good, fast, or cheap, right? I think people in this. It wasn't until I did a call in the middle of very rural, super rural Missouri that I realized that, oh my gosh, depending upon where you live in this country, may determine whether you survive a medical emergency. And the problem is a lot of the folks who are pushing and drive most of the policy decisions are in major metropolitan areas where, you on average have you have good health care, and you have a reasonably fast response. I think, at some point we, have to, and some of that is also us, right? Is that as people put out RFPs for ambulance services, when someone would say, like, we want you to make double medic trucks, and we go, okay, we'll do that. We want you to put them on 24/7. Okay, we'll do that. And instead of looking at them and going, actually, that doesn't, we can't sustain a model that way, right? Like, it's not That's actually not good medicine to have double paramedic trucks. What's better medicine is to offer more paramedics by partnering that medic with a really competent EMT. And that
Yeah.
way you can disperse your ALS services further than just two paramedics on one truck. That comes back to us getting comfortable in our lane. And we're noticing that now as hospital systems are coming back because they're having these extensive offload times. We're able to go back and go, all right, well, now you really need us to move these people. We're going to need to renegotiate that agreement that said that, we'll be here within 12 minutes to move a patient 90% of the time. That's just not going to happen. And by the way, one of the things I know is when I started working and I was in dispatch in my first couple of years, the hospitals knew who was leaving the next day. They used to schedule the discharges the day before. And so that allowed us to plan and staff, and we could do it for much
That
more.
sounds like a good deal right there.
And the reality is these hospitals know who's going home tomorrow. They know, and they could set it up so that we could pre-schedule these things, which would mean that these offload times would be fewer, which would mean that the backup into the ED would be less, which would mean that there'd be less, wall time for emergency trucks that are getting held up, which would mean that there are more emergency units to be on the road. I think the problem is people don't understand there's just one out of hospital system, and it's all interrelated. And if you think that there's a 911 system, then a non-urgent system, that's not true. So, I just, I think that what I'm watching is an evolution. And what they say is that evolution, change is not mandatory because survival's not, or change is not necessary because survival's not mandatory. I think that there'll be aspects of what we do that we won't continue to be able to do because it just isn't possible.
I'm 100% there. It's been on my mind lately. I've been talking to a few people about it. I'm never a doom and gloom guy. I'm usually the positive. We can believe in stuff, but we got to change our mentality guy. But what I do see is the industry of EMS fracturing so deeply right now that it's going to break. But I do believe when it breaks, we're going to come out in a different form. Same with the hospitals. It used to be hospitals did their thing, EMS did their thing, and we're going to see more of that integrated teamwork model because it has to, because hospitals are going down lists of literally 18, 19 different services just to get somebody to a higher level of care. And they might not get it. So 12 hours later, they got to try again. And they're burning all this time to, please, somebody take this patient needs help. We all agree they need help. And at the same time, we're going, we can't. We have 2 trucks to cover a 5-truck area, and we're dying too.
Yeah, I think there's also going to need to be a recognition that there is one EMS system, public, private, it doesn't matter, right? Because again, there's been this, I know there's been a push on the part of fire service, and I was a firefighter for 18 years, to get more and more. My town actually now has a fully staffed, an ambulance. Well, they have full-time staff, 24/7. If a fire call comes in, they get on the fire truck. If an ambulance call comes in, they get on the ambulance. They wanted a full-time ambulance. The challenge that I see is that that's good for maybe prompt response. However, it means again that you have firefighters who maybe do 800 calls a year, and that's, by the way, 8 to 12 people. So those calls, you can only be so proficient. But to look at the systems where people are like, well, we need to put up fire-based ambulances, and I go, well, it doesn't matter how many you jam into the hospital, you're going to need to get people out. And by the way, at some point, you're going to have to supplement your 911 service with private. So,
100%. I think you said a phrase earlier that is a thing throughout our industry, is a noble profession, right? But we don't act. I would speak from personal experience and say a lot of times we don't act like it. I'm here to save your ass, not kiss your ass, right? I'm overweight. And there's people who are way more overweight than I am, and they come waddling into a house. That's not noble. That's like, I'm more worried for you than the patient type of deal. And there are some that stand up by all means. But I think that's also a fallacy. It's a noble profession. It is a calling. I mean, you do have to be a certain type of person to do certain aspects of this job, and that's why we see a diversification. Man, we are flooding in a great way. We're flooding in EMTs at the bottom level of this triangle. And then that pyramid gets real tight real fast of how many go to A, and then the paramedic at the top is so small. And it's because not generational. I'm with you. I never saw it. I literally went to be a paramedic because I wanted the opportunity to earn more, and I got tired of being told by 5 different people how to do it 5 different ways. So I wanted to do my way. So I became one of the people who told you how to do it my way. And even you've been saying what I believe. We don't necessarily need double medic trucks. It's a great idea, but let's break that down. When EMT-R, which is EMT responder in the state of Georgia, is also national registry level, when that became recognized by Georgia to help alleviate some of the crisis of people we have, essentially they're educated drivers. They can do CPR, stop the bleed, all the stuff you need a partner for. And I'm speaking from a paramedic standpoint, all the stuff you need a partner for, and they can drive. And everybody, I mean, not everybody, the vocal, I don't know if they're majority or minority, but the vocal people were like, you're diluting the service. You're ending what EMS is. And I even heard the other day, somebody said to me, because I try to run double medic trucks on one of our trucks so we can balance, split, do what we need to do. But I was told, I was like, hey, I thought we had higher standards than that over there. And I went, I have 3 medics to run 3 24-hour shifts. What standard do you want me to stand on that means that truck runs? Because what are you doing as a partner? Driving. So I'd rather have a solid driver like an EMTR who, like you said, instead of running 80 calls a year, they're driving all the time. They're really on their game of making sure their partner's taken care of and safe. To me, that's a higher standard of a good driver and a good medic that can work together. But our industry says, and outside industry says, well, double medics. I've worked double medic truck. You still, somebody has to drive, and you're in the back by yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more from my perspective. What I would love to see and what I think would yield better outcomes would be longer tenure in their partnerships, right? Because as you know, like Charles, if you and I worked a truck together, first couple of calls, the first month would be a little bit challenging, but then they'd get to a point where we wouldn't have to talk, right? We wouldn't have to. We knew what roles we were going to take, and what you want as a patient or as a community, or you want the organization that has people who have been there for a period of time and have a certain level of competency, and time in and competency are both really pretty important. And so as I look at the double medic situation, I just sort of think like, well, it's about having the right tool in the right place at the right time. There's probably a super minority set of 1 to 5% of the calls that really do require 2 paramedics in the back, right? Where like this person super sick, major trauma, you need someone managing airway and pushing meds and doing, but you still need someone to drive. And the other thing that I would say is that, as an EMT, and I'm still an EMT, I knew that, truthfully, even at a trauma level, that's a BLS skill for the most part.
Right.
And so at a trauma level, again, a good, really well experienced or a competent EMT is actually a better partner to a paramedic, I think, just as a general rule of thumb.
Yeah. Changing mindsets is that, because I've seen it happen both ways. I've been in a paramedic partnership where I was the EMT, ended up covering for some of his bad decisions, not medical, legal bad decisions, but personal, ethical bad decisions. And that can happen, sure, but that just means you just have to have your finger on the pulse, touch base, watch for the signs. Because I had an EMT that was my partner for a year and a half, and we were one of the top teams in our company because of what you just said. We learned how to communicate well, we balanced each other, and we worked well with others. So it wasn't just me and her. Our team was the fire station that we're at, and our truck with their truck, we were top notch. To toot my horn a little bit, we were definitely looked at as like we could do our jobs together, and that just broke down because we broke down all barriers. I think it comes down to, Scott, the heart of what's going to bring change is we all have to believe that we are here to serve, period. And you can make it as simple as, I'm clocked in on your clock, I'll do whatever you want. Because I'm not going to run that call. I'm sorry, we're not paying you. But that really comes down to, you're not here to serve. Be here to serve. That's what we're in this industry for, right? And that's how we come together.
And I think, I don't know if we talked about this when I first met you, but one of the things that I like to do with new employees is I ask them to draft before they, in their first couple of days. I'd like you to draft your own personal mission statement. Organizations have mission statements, but I want
Okay.
you to draft your personal mission statement. They're like, I don't know what that is. It's I want you to tell me what you aspire to be in this career, right? And I want a copy of that, because throughout your career, we're going to revisit this personal mission statement to see whether it needs to be, whether it's the same, whether it needs to change, because over time, people's relationship with the job changes, and and I say job and profession, there are two things there, right? I've watched people jump from service to service, and frankly, it's this, red stretcher, yellow stretcher,
Yeah.
Zoll cardiac monitor, Phillips, doesn't really matter. The job is not going to modify it. And when I see them change, they're like, I just think I'll be happier there. And I'm like, all right, well, that's possible. It is possible. But if you're not happy fundamentally with doing this profession, you're not going to be happy regardless of where you do it. But, I think what I would really love to see, again, this comes back to broadening the preparation of the person in the job to really prepare them for a life in EMS. It's
Yeah.
just a different, this is not a punch in, punch out kind of job. This is not, it is, I still have my fire portable on. I've been off that fire department for 4 years. And every single time that tone goes off, I mute the television. I'm like, what is that? Why? Because it is sort of part of the fabric of who you are. And it's about finding those people who are, and it's becoming increasingly more challenging. But part of that is because, one, I don't know how we're doing educating them. But what I will say is, I think we need to do a better job of telling them what role it is. My fire chief, when I first joined the fire department 18 years ago, said, we help the people. And I was like, oh, I'd come from a relatively urban environment in EMS, and one of the calls we did was a cardiac arrest where a guy had really fallen from standing position. Looks like he just dead right there, right, DRT. And
DRT.
there was blood on the floor. And when we were leaving, we packaged him up, and we were leaving. And the chief, we're down there, and the chief goes, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to head back to the station." He goes, "No, go upstairs, roll that rug up." I'm like, "What?" He goes, "We're taking that to the cleaners, because when she comes home, she's not going to be with her husband."
Yeah.
He's like, we take care of the people in this community, and that's everybody. And that actual, and thankfully at the time, I was no longer working really full time in EMS, because that, when I looked back at how I had done, and I thought I was a pretty good EMT, I was like, man, I had it wrong all along, right? Like and that's the part that I wish we could instill upon people is, and I don't know how to do it. If I could figure it out. Go ahead.
Okay. It starts with the schools, and schools resist. I taught in an EMT school for 6 years, and my heart was exactly what you're talking about, because it wasn't the medicine that got me. It wasn't some trauma with something that was so dark and deep, watch this kid die or whatever, that got me out of the industry. What got me out of the industry was the inability to manage my money, the inability to find, well, I just get a thumbs up myself. The inability to manage money, the inability to manage my time, and to manage my mindset. And that was my heart of everything, because I got married young. I was already an EMT when I met my wife. We got married right after I got my paramedic numbers. And so she married into the life. That's all she ever knew me. But even at that point, when I was just running, and chasing everything, the dollar included, she was like, the short version is, I didn't marry you to not be with you. It
Right.
doesn't matter how much money we have, which we needed money, but and so we're not having those partnerships. And so when I taught at the school, I was like, look, we are a private school. We set our own curriculum. And yeah, you have to hit these high notes to pass the test, but I need at least one night, give me 4 hours to talk about the life of EMS, and to just give 1,000-foot view of finance and what that looks like, 1,000-foot view of how your relationships need to happen as far as communication, and I got that one time in 6 years, because, well, we got to turn them over, and we got to get them out, and but we're not preparing them. And then they come, now I'm on the business side, and they come to me as a business, and I do a little bit more in orientation, but I only have so much time to instill these basic principles that you have to go find.
Yeah, you came up with a point there that I think is really important. Is when there's an old saying that medicine is a jealous mistress, right? That when my wife told me this before we got married, she said, "You marry me, you're in it for you're not the only one in my life. Basically, I'm going to have a bunch of people who count on me, and I'm going to expel or expend a ton of empathy for them. So I may not have empathy for you, right? And I think that that's something that I wish we could do a better job at in orientation, is saying, look, you didn't just take this job. Your spouse took this job too. Your family took this job, right? Like they're gonna, and that's one thing my fire chief also used to do. He used to make, the firefighters stand up at the annual like holiday dinner, and then he would make the family stand up, and he would say, "You guys also have sacrificed on behalf of this community, whether it be Thanksgivings or Christmases or Hanukkah or whatever it was." And he said, and so I think again it comes back to, I would love if we could develop an orientation program where we're talking about, help your family, because here's the family orientation program for people in EMS. Here's, right, recognize what's going to change over time with me as a human, right? I'm going to come home and I'm going to be tired and groggy in the beginning of the day, when you're probably wound up and ready to roll, or I may not feel like talking about it, right? My very first ambulance call I know we talked about was one in which somebody got burned alive, quite literally.
Yeah.
And, this sort of, there's a saying, right, that, sort of for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And I think understanding that, and helping people prepare for how they are going to change as a human being as they get into this field, and then how they can sustain that over a long period of time. Because again, right now, for a lot of us, it's like, we're like, well, it's kind of like, it's like when you let go with a bike and you just go like, let's just see how this goes. What the hell is, and I think that can be a dangerous thing to do, or that's probably why we're seeing some of the results we're seeing, right? Is that, so.
And I think there's a perspective change that ultimately, metaphysically, we're going to pull people into kicking and screaming, drag them in, kicking and screaming. The metaphor I use is, again, early in my marriage, I'm always a tech guy. I'm always an early adopter, and DSL came around and it's expensive, and I wanted that fast internet, and I wanted Wi-Fi came around, and I wanted to put Wi-Fi in the house, and it's expensive. My wife's like, we don't need that. We don't need that. So, but I got to the point where she said, fine, do what you want. Everything else is taken care of, just whatever. And then within 2 to 3 months, like, she was going to school, and she went up to the library at the school and came back. She's like, oh my God, our internet is so slow here. I'm like, I told you that. But that perspective of, I don't care, I don't understand it. And we get that so much, that tip of our nose viewpoint of, in EMS, I'm going to be specific about that. In EMS, it's hours. We have to grind so many. I need to work 90. I can't tell you how many people have told me, like, I'll work 80, 90-hour weeks. I'll do it. I just need, just give me the overtime. I'm like, for paramedics, currently, as I sit at the recording in my company, we pay minimum $30 an hour for a paramedic on 24-hour shifts. Now, they only work 2 24-hour shifts a week, but even with overtime built in, that's about $92,000 a year to work 2 days a week. And our perspective is, I don't think like that. I just knew that paycheck's coming, and I got my lifestyle to maintain. And we've equated lifestyle maintenance not with what you're bringing home and how to maintain your life, but with hours. And that's the big hurdle I've found trying to educate the paramedics here, is that look at the bigger picture. You've got 5 days in the week to do whatever you want. You want to do that side hustle, you can do that. You want to work at a second job, pick up time, you can do that. But you're literally making almost $100,000 in a year at 2 days a week. So why are we focused on, if I go, and here's a drastic change. Actually, I did the math on $33 an hour to get a third day, 24 48s, right? Which is unsustainable, because that third paycheck, you drop off hours, it kicks you in the legs and takes it out from underneath you. That to maintain the same stuff, and to maintain the same amount of money in 2 days to go to 3, you'd have to drop $13 an hour, and you're still making it for more hours.
Well, and I think it's important to say that you work at 24, but don't think that following 24 is going to be useful time, right? It's kind of like when I think about presenting or speaking, I would go like, well, I'm only up there for an hour or 2 hours. And someone will say to me, but you, one, had to prepare, two, you had to travel there. You're like, that's all time that you're not, you're not productive. And I think, it's looking at a paramedic and an EMT, because I had a Monday, Wednesday 24, so I arguably had Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday off. It doesn't get much better than that.
Right.
And the reality is I almost always picked up another 24, which meant I was habitually tired, right? That's all it really meant, because the following day I was junk. And by the time I was also sleeping when other people were awake. And I was awake when other people were sleeping. And that is isolating. And so I do think it comes back on some level to this idea about, hey, we need to better prepare people for the job. We need to better preview what that job's going to be like. And we have to get away from a clinically based educational model, right? Your field training officers should be talking about, not necessarily talking about how to financially manage, but saying like, look, man, don't take that shift. You're going to want to, but don't do it. And, and I've had people over the course of my consulting career go, don't take that gig. You're going to be miserable if you, like I did 3 weeks in a row in San Diego for 24 hours. And I will tell you, I live on the East Coast. That I was like, it's 24 hours in and out, piece of cake. I was junk. So, but yeah, I mean, do I think it's dying? I think it can't die. Right. Sure. In other words, that which can't end, it just can't. That being said, I do think we need to change the value proposition of the job, and talk a little bit, and maybe do a better job at marketing or outreach.
Understanding what it is and what you're getting into. Yeah. So, we're at our time, Scott. You mentioned a lot of different things to teach people, and you run more EMS consulting. Are there any kind of classes that we can get on there and see this kind of?
Yeah. So, fair chunk of my stuff is up on Prodigy EMS. For those who know, Prodigy EMS is a platform based out of Cambridge, Massachusetts. Some folks that I've known for a long, long time. But yeah, I mean, I am at conferences pretty regularly. I think I did 100 or so flights last year, and while we're in a little bit of a lull right now, things pick up again starting in September. So, but yeah, lots of content certainly for folks who are interested. You can go over to my website. It's just moreemsconsulting.com. You can find me there, or you can of course always reach out to my good friend Charles, and I'm sure he can connect you with me as well.
I will get them there too. Thank you for coming on One EMS the assessment. We'll have you back. We can talk for
love to.
So, everybody let us know. info@oneems.com if you think the paramedic profession is dying or what you think needs to have changed. Thank you, Scott, for being on. I appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Take care.